what's been a really interesting and really stimulating conversation about film criticism, and I'm delighted to introduce you all to the star of our Q&A, Pablo Villaça. Pablo Villaça is a writer, filmmaker, and film critic, and he has been one since 1994, and he has written for many Brazilian movie magazines. In 2002, he became the first Latin American critic to be part of the Online Film Critics Society, being elected its first non-English speaking government committee member in 2011. In 2001, he won a theatre award for adapting an old children's fairy tale for the stage. And in 2005, he published his first book, O Cinema Além das Montanhas, the cinema Beyond the Mountains. And he's also currently the film critic of Cinema em Cena, the oldest Brazilian movie website, which he created back in 1997. And if you look in the chat, I've put the link there for Cinema em Cena for whoever's interested in taking a quick peek. And he also teaches film theory, language, and criticism in courses all over Brazil, having taught more than 1,500 students since 2009. In 2007, he was the only non-US film critic to be invited by the Museum of the Moving Image and the New York Times to participate in a week-long seminar on film criticism. And in 2008, he directed his first short film, Ethics, and in 2011, he wrote and directed his second short film, Blind Death. Pablo, you're most welcome. I just wanted to start. I'm curious to know how this all came about. So I thought that if we just start with the first question, which would be, since you got in very early on in terms of thinking about the shift from analog to digital in terms of film criticism, if you could just talk us through how did this come about, and in particular, I guess I'm interested in knowing what has changed over the course of the last. It's more than 20 years, isn't it? It's much more than 20 years since you've been active in film criticism, and what has improved for the better and what has got worse, I guess.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. I was very pleased to be able to talk to you. Actually, I came about at the right time. I started. I never thought I would be a film critic or that would be a profession. I always enjoyed writing. That was my main mode of expression, writing. But I went to medical school, actually. And I never thought I would live writing about movies. But then in 1994, the internet, actually the pre-internet came to Brazil, which was the bulletin board systems, the BBS, which were basically, you connected to some guy's computer, and there would be a bunch of files that you could download. There would be chats, chat rooms, and that was it. And I always loved cinema. I always studied, but just for myself, theory, and I always read a lot of criticism and movies from all countries, current ages. So that was something that I always loved. That my grandmother imparted to me, this love for movies. But that was it. That was just a love for movies. And but then the BBS, the pre-internet, came to Brazil. And I had this idea. I offered myself to create a kind of a film section for the BBS where I would I would manually write all the movie theaters schedule for the week, and I would give stars and just write one or two sentences about each movie, and that's how it started. Then when the proper internet came to Brazil, I created Cinema em Cena, which is my website. It's the oldest movie Brazilian website. I started it in 1997, but I was still at medical school. So I was doing both things. But then 2 years later, I realized that's what I want to do. I want, like I always said, I wanted to be rich. And I knew that money was in film criticism, not in medical school. So I decided to leave medical school behind and become a full-time film critic and become a rich man. So I never had a proper experience in writing for printing media. I wrote for a couple of regional newspapers, but and a movie magazine actually, Set Magazine, which was the major movie magazine in Brazil for many years. But I was never a full-time collaborator. I sporadically wrote some things, but my main media was always internet. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I guess sort of carrying on from that, that's how you got started, and obviously, but the way that you communicate with your virtual audience will have developed over the years. I mean, where would you? Actually, how would you sort of describe that shift, that gradual thing that once you get on Tinterweb, as we call it over here, what then happens next?
But that's interesting because when Cinema in Scene started, it was all HTML. It was very primitive. Actually, I had to learn how to. I'm not going to say that I learned how to code, but the basics of HTML. So the first version of my website, I did it myself on. It was on Netscape, which was a browser slash thingy that you could design your website. It was very bad. It was, it had a dark template and the fonts were blue. So you read it and you got, a tumor or something because it's very ugly. But although it was not, it was before Internet 2.0 and Wikipedia and such, I always had a way of making things interesting for the reader in the sense that they could interact with me. So even before we had forums in the internet, each film review of mine, below the credit, below the text, I would have a space for the reader to leave a comment. But it was not something that it was automatic. So they would send an email, and I would manually put their comment below the critic, below the text, and someone would answer, and I would add there, and it was very primitive. But the sense of community we always had, so it was not really a big change for me, in the sense we were the first ones to install a proper forum where people could, discuss by themselves without any interference. And but what I sensed began to change actually when I started to become a little more well known. I found out this thing called hate, and which was not a very good discovery, and that kind of changed the things for me, because until then it was all fun and games. It was very pleasurable, I would share my love for movies and my opinions about movies I was seeing, and people would actually, oh, that's nice. Oh, I don't quite agree with you there, but I see what you're trying to say. But then the website started to grow and grow, and I became a little more well known, and then started you know what? You're an asshole. You didn't like that movie? You should die. You should die badly. And I didn't like that. But it only got worse with social networks. And but honestly, that was the main difference for me from the beginning to now. My work is basically the same. I'm a writer. I do some very sporadically videos. I used to do more of them, but it's not quite what I enjoy doing. My thing is writing, And so that really didn't change. I write, people read, they send comments, they send death threats, and that's it.
I'm laughing, but I'm laughing incredibly uncomfortably. So as long as you understand that I'm not laughing at what you're experiencing,
No.
and I do want to revisit this subject of hate, and I think that's significant because I want to talk a little bit about sort of politics and your political stance and sort of the connection between your film criticism and that too. So we'll definitely come back to that. But it's interesting that you bring it up so quickly. As part of your experience of film criticism, the word hate, it was less than 2 minutes, before that comes into things. So it's an interesting.
The first film criticism that I got hate for was Deep Impact, which is a maybe later movie in which an asteroid hit Earth. I think it's from 1998. And that was the first time. Oh, no. There's one instance before that, Twister, where it was Twister, the hurricane movie with Bill Paxton and Ellen Hunt. That was the first time someone told me I should die because I didn't like a movie. But it was, I thought, no, this guy's crazy. That's not, it was very, very rare. Then came Deep Impact, and I got 5, 6 very offensive emails, because it was, you have to remember, back then people had to write emails to insult you. They couldn't just log in Twitter and say, oh, no, they have to open their email composer, they had to write your address and then a subject line, and then, oh, hi, how are you? I've read your film criticism, I've read your article about Deep Impact, and I was thinking that you should die. But they had to go through the whole process. It was very interesting, because back then, I think hatred was more pure, because you had to keep hating through the whole process. Now you just have to, wow, fuck you, and then that's it. Now, back then you had to work for express your hate. So I think people today, their hatred is very lazy, I think.
It's clearly something that you have to deal with, and that you've learned to deal with. Yeah. I mean, in terms of, you mentioned that you do make some videos, and those videos are up on your Cinema in Scena website, but also you have a YouTube channel that I think that you upload those onto as well. And they're interesting because, as you say, I mean, you're very much a person of words. So when you do a film analysis to camera, it's very much you talking. And, without I mean, is that a particular choice that you've made without, sort of breaking that up with images, or is it to do with monetizing and copyright and all the rest of it? It's you to camera. It does actually work incredibly well, I should say, because not everybody is articulate as you are when they're free, sort of freewheeling when they're speaking. So it's something that you can clearly do, and that you can do it. So I'm guessing that's why that's your style of communicating.
I never liked the kind of video where the guy's cutting all the time. Every time he breathes, he cuts, and it's all. I don't like it. I really don't. So and I teach film language classes, so I'm used to speaking, just talking, and that's what I like to do. If I'm going to, for me, when I'm going to talk about a film, I'm going really to structure what I'm going to say when I'm writing. I do the structure of the text first, and then I write. But when I'm talking, I really appreciate the feeling that I'm just talking, I'm just speaking to you. So that's what I like to do. But I know that that's not what people like to see on YouTube. They get very impatient soon, because I'm not cutting all the time. I'm not inserting all sorts of images to punctuate what I'm saying, and that's why I'm not doing as as much videos today as I used to, because frankly, I don't see the point, because I'm not going to do what others do. I'm not going to cut all the time. And I'm not going to, keep inserting scenes so it becomes more, showy. I just want to speak, and people usually they don't have the same kind of patience today to watch, a guy talk for 10 minutes.
I think I don't want to misrepresent the different faces that you can see here, the presenters that we've had as part of this conference, but I think I'm right in saying that everyone, or no one rather, relies financially on film criticism. We all have other jobs, and I think I'm right in saying that everyone has, everyone is an academic, and that's their principal form of payment. So, and I don't want to ask too personal a question here, Pablo, although I did run it past you before. I'm just thinking about, how is it possible for a film critic? I know you were being ironic when you were talking about dropping medicine to go with film criticism, but is it possible? Is it possible to make a living from being a film critic? I mean, I would imagine the guys who run Pipocando, the presumably the most successful YouTube film related website in Brazil that have millions and millions of followers. I'm guessing through monetizing that website, they can make some money off it. But what does everybody else do? How does everyone else survive? How do you survive?
I donate blood.
Okay.
I live, actually, my main source of income is teaching. In 2003, I was invited to teach a film theory, language, and criticism in Belo Horizonte, where I live. It was just 20, 30 students. It was twice a week. And it didn't pay very well, but it was a very, very interesting experience. I really enjoyed teaching. But then I forgot all about it. And in 2009, 6 years later, it was an accident. I was going on vacation to Bahia. I have an uncle there, and I was going to spend the summer in Bahia, Salvador. And I think I tweeted, I believe I tweeted, or I said something on my site that I was going to Bahia, and a group from Salvador, they managed theater there. They asked me if you're going to be here, would you maybe teach a short class on film criticism and theory? And so, yeah, okay. It's a good idea. I'd be spending money that I don't have, so maybe I can make some too. And it was packed. The first day I went there, when they would tell me how many students had registered, and they would, give me the money. I couldn't believe it. It was, I believe it was 50 people. And it was enough that I was, and I'm not kidding here, that this is not a joke. My credit card, I was really in debt. I really owed the credit card company a lot of money. I could pay what I owed with that one class. I remember today the feeling of, a burden off my shoulders. Like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I think I'm going to keep doing this. And so I did. From 2009 to today, I teach classes. Before the pandemic, I was traveling all over Brazil. I went to all Brazilian regions. I went from Manaus, which is the north, to Porto Alegre, which is the southest point, capital at the southest in Brazil. So I had almost 6,000 students, and that's what I do mainly. And after the pandemic, I found out that teaching through Zoom is very rewarding. So I'm going to, in May, I'm going to teach my 6th course in Zoom. Last year I did 5 classes, and now I'm doing a 6th one, and that's how my income comes from. Not from not from film. Well, I like to excuse me. I I don't think I'm being fair to criticism by saying that my income doesn't come from film criticism, because people come to my classes because they read me. It's very rare that someone that registered to do a course with me never heard of me, or never heard of, never read something I wrote. So I think that the fact that I write, it's what brings the students. So it's not directly from film criticism, but it's a big part.
Okay, thank you, thanks. And I see that we've got some of your fans are currently using the chat to say hi and tell you where they are: Fortaleza, Santa Catarina, and Ireland. Brilliant. Danielle is in Ireland. So it's interesting that you bring up that, sort of this question and this link between your film criticism and your teaching. So you teach, sort of, it's the how to read a film, but it's also, you teach film criticism, you mentioned. Is that part of what you teach? How to be a film critic?
Yes. In the sense that I teach theory and language and a little bit of history, and I think that's where film criticism comes from. I do teach film criticism in the sense that in the last class of one of my courses, I teach them how I write, my techniques, some tips to make it easier for people when they're writing. But I think the main thing is, if you know film theory, if you know film language, if you're used to see a lot of movies, if you understand colors, if you understand lens, if you understand production design, editing, sound, you can be a film critic. You just have to organize your thoughts. So I teach language, film language. I also have a course where I only speak about The Godfather, which is I spend 15 hours with the students watching the first movie and stopping almost, shot by shot and discussing each shot of the movie. And I think I like to say that's a practical version of the other 2 courses, and which is an obsession of mine. I'm obsessed with The Godfather, the trilogy. But there's no way I could teach the trilogy in one course. I spent 15 hours talking about just the first movie. But when I created that course, I thought that would be it. That's going to be the one I'm going to be remembered for. I'm going to pack all the classes, and it was the opposite. It's my last attended course, but I loved it.
That's interesting. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, I was reminded of this earlier today because Fernando Arenas gave us a really interesting talk about a particular Spanish film website, and he drew attention to a couple of what he described as blind spots within this website. Now, I'm not trying to suggest there's blind spots in cinema en cena, pelo amor de Deus, but just sort of throwing this out here, and one of them was the lack of political discussion, and we know that that's not the case when it comes to cinema en cena. We can come back to that, but the other one was a connection with national cinema, and I'm just wondering, what's your position with regard to how do you see yourself in relation to national cinema, to Brazilian cinema? I think as a film critic,
I think I'm a big advocate. Because I also think, and I know we're going to speak politics soon, but I think speaking about Brazilian cinema is talking about politics, And I always say that on Twitter, on Facebook, on my reviews, on talks like this. And I'm not afraid of sounding like I'm a patriot, which is a word that I hate. Patriotism, I hate this word. And it's not that. But I truly believe that Brazilian cinema is one of the best in the world, really. Because we have in Brazil something that I don't see often. Brazil is a very, very, very big country. It's a huge country. And we make cinema all over Brazil. It's not like, we're talking about the US. Well, yeah, it's a very, very big country. But basically, they use the East Coast, in New York, West Coast, Hollywood, and that's where the main productions are stay. Not in Brazil. In Brazil, we have movies that are being made in North, South, Southeast, Center, Northeast, which is especially Pernambuco, which is a state from the Northeast region in Brazil, which is, I can't start to say how beautiful, how rich is the cinema they're producing there. And when you go to a film festival and you watch Brazilian movies from the same period, let's see what Brazil produced in 2020, and you watch 10, 15 movies, and you can't believe they're from the same country. They are aesthetically very differently. Their themes are very different. The language is very different. Not Portuguese. The film language, the narrative form, and they really don't like the films from the same country. And I don't see that quite often. A country that can produce such a vast and different filmography. And so I'm a very, very, very big advocate of Brazil. I think our cinema is extremely rich in terms of art. In terms of money, not so much.
And presumably that advocacy, does that translate into, your blogging and your, on your website? Sure. And yeah, okay.
Yeah, I write. Yeah, no. When I go to international film festivals, for instance, I make a point of watching all the Brazilian films that are in there, and I write about all of them. I write about Brazilian films that are released here. I just have one little. And I know that's not very. No, I wouldn't say that's not ethical. It's a choice. When I see a Brazilian film that I hate, I usually choose not to write about it, because I think Brazilian films, they face a lot of problems already. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of prejudice against Brazilian film in Brazil. I think Brazilian movies, they are much, much, much more respected abroad than they are in Brazil, because we have this in Brazil, we call here viralatismo, which is something like stray dogs, in the sense that vira-latas.
Mongrel complex.
That's it. So anything that comes from Europe, anything that comes especially from the US, there is, oh, this is great, this is beautiful, they're the best. And if it's Brazilian, it's awful, it's poor, it's in bad taste. And so there's a lot of prejudice. So I don't want to, give more ammo to these people. Mm-hmm. So usually when I don't like a Brazilian movie, I choose not to write about it, unless I really, really hate it, because then I derive a certain pleasure of, I hated this movie, it made me suffer, and now I want to pay it back.
That's interesting. We've already got quite a few questions here in the Q&A, so I am going to read the first one out, and it is from Alvaro, who is an academic and film critic himself. Was there any dialogue between Cinema em Cena and other online magazines that appeared a little later in the first decade of the 2000s, such as Contracampo, Cinética, Filmes Polvo? also from Belo Horizonte. And how do you see the dialogue between film critics in Brazil, which was a question I was going to ask anyway. So.
Well, I was much more connected to the websites that originated at the same roughly time that Cinema em Cena did. So Adoro Cinema, which was came about, I think, a year later than Cinema em Cena. So I was, and I still am, very friendly with the Francisco, which was the guy who created that website. He's not with Adoro Cinema anymore. Contracampo, Cinética, Filmes Polvo, that's a very interesting question, because the type of film criticism that I do is very different from mine. And I think there was a kind of a rivalry at the beginning. And that rivalry, I think it was originated from two sources. First of all, internet was not, it was just in the first years. So I think we were all trying to establish ourselves. Second, there was, well, we had different views of what cinema is and what film criticism is. But essentially, I think we were too young. And when you were young, you were dumb. You were very competitive. You know, I'm the best. And how dare they to, you know, I think, and now I'm speaking for myself only, obviously. But I used to see them as, yeah, like as rivals, and that made me hate them, because like I said, I was stupid. Years after that, I became friendly. I cannot say that I'm friends with them, but I became friendly with lots of the guys who wrote for those magazines, which are great guys, and they were very, very good writers. And I just wish I was smarter in the beginning, so I could, you know, tell myself, no, don't start anything. But no, I don't have. I never had much interaction with them, but with other online film websites, oh yeah, we were very friendly, and we are still today. And after I became a more known film critic in Brazil, I found that it became easier for me to become friends with, you know, traditional film writers. When I started, there was a lot of prejudice against online film critics. In the beginning, for instance, I couldn't go to press screenings. Cinema em Cena had we had a lot of more readers than a lot of newspapers, and they could get to press screenings, and I couldn't, because I was from, you know, online film criticism. But then the years passed, people started accepting film criticism, and I became friends with, you know, the press media critics like Zanin and Maria do Rosário and Marcelo Castilho, who died, unfortunately, very young, and a lot of others.
Do you sense that there is a divide between academic film critics, so film critics who are also academics who teach in, you know, you're a teacher, but, you know, those who teach in higher education institutions, or not?
I think, yes, I think there is a divide, but it's not it's not a rivalry. Like I said before, it's much more a case of we don't see each other as much. Yeah. Because when you are working as a film critic, you go to festivals and you are always bumping into each other. You spend a lot of time together in the same room. So I think it's more natural that we will become friends. And I think that's the only problem, you know, with establishing friendship with academics. We don't see them much.
Okay. Right, we've got a super question here from Messias Adriano. Pablo, you said that text and writing are your main form of work. For someone who's thinking about starting a career in film criticism with the goal of reaching a considerable number of people, what would be your advice about investing in a specific medium?
YouTube, I think. I don't see writing as a viable. That makes me very sad because I consider myself kind of a dinosaur in the sense that I don't think there's much time left for written film criticism. And I know that because every time I write about a movie and I put it online and I go to Twitter and I link to it, 2 minutes later, someone will say, "Oh, are you also going to do a video?" I've just written 1,500 words. Why am I going to, do a video? But that tells me that people, they're not very interested in reading anymore. YouTube.
I mean,
It pains me, just to be clear, it really pains me to say that, really. I wish I could say, no, oh, improve your writing. That's it, write a lot, but it's not reality.
I mean, do you have any kind of contact with the YouTuber generation that dabbles? I'm saying dabbles. I'm putting my cards on the table in terms of what I think of this. That dabbles in film criticism. I mean, do you have any kind of take on their work or any contact with them?
A lot of my students became YouTubers.
Mm-hmm.
I have I have a lot of students that have YouTube channels that are way bigger than mine.
Yeah, my daughter has millions of followers on YouTube. She's not a film critic though.
So and I love them. They're very, very, very good at what they do, and they really apply themselves. I don't have any prejudice against YouTubers any more than I would have regarding a blogger or anyone who writes and don't study before they do their profession. I think there is a lot of people that are not equipped to write about films or anything actually, but there are a lot of film critics that they have no sense of film history, they have no sense of film language. What they do is not film criticism, is reviewing, which is different. They're just saying, well, I watched that movie and I enjoyed it, and there's a lot of action, and I thought it was quite well filmed, which is something that I never understood what that means. Well filmed, well photographed, well edited. What is well edited, well filmed? If you're saying the movie has a good editing, tell me why. And there's a lot of that, but not only on YouTube, also in written film criticism. But I have lots of students who became successful YouTubers, and I really love them. Some examples, I don't know if there's some, just so you can search for them. Otávio Gá, Max Valarezo. I saw that you put on the presentation for this seminary, Pipocando. One of them did my course. I think it was Rolandinho, I'm not sure. And Joyce Pais, which is a great YouTuber, she did. So YouTube.
That's interesting too. Okay, yeah, so YouTube it is. We've got a question here from Professora Camila Azevedo. What do you think about Cannes' decision to hold an in-person event during the pandemic?
That's another. First of all, I just realized that since I haven't spoken English in a long time because of the pandemic, I've not been abroad. I'm a little kind of rusty. So
your English is super. Don't worry
if
about
I'm
that
not being well understood, I'm sorry, because I think the last time I spoke English was 18 months ago. So
it's great.
That's a painful thing to say because I love the experience of being in a movie theater. I think that's the way of watching movies. And I'm strongly against going to the movies right now. I'm sorry, I can't. I would not be a responsible person if I said, you know what, if you take care, if you wear a good mask, and if there's, there's not a lot of people inside the theater, no, I cannot do that. I cannot do that. So I think I do not approve any in-person events during the pandemic. I don't approve. I applied for a credential, but I have absolutely no expectation of going. If they do indeed go through with the festival, which I don't think they will be able to, but if they do, I'm Brazilian. I live in a country that the president is a monster, is a sociopath, and he's killing everyone. And Brazilians right now are pariahs in the world. They're not accepting us anywhere, and they shouldn't, because we are infected. So even if can happens, I don't think they will see a Brazilian come in. Oh my God, someone from Bolsonaro's country. Oh, welcome, come in. Please cough on me. So I'm against it. I don't think it should happen.
Okay, so I think we've held off as long as we possibly can. Here's a question from Adriano. Brazil is living under a dictatorial censorship government. How do you think Brazilian cinema will be in the next years, and how hard will it be for filmmakers to release their films about it, which I guess means talking about what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, so, yeah. If people thought Trump was bad, they don't have any idea what is really bad. Bolsonaro is bad. Bolsonaro is a Trump advocate, but without any concerns about anything. I'm not saying that Trump was a very empathic person, but I can guarantee you that Bolsonaro is an absolute sociopath. He is. We have 340,000 people who died from this pandemic. And yesterday, Bolsonaro said that we shouldn't cry over spoiled milk. That's the kind of person we are talking about. He is still against lockdowns. He is still against wearing masks. And his followers are just as bad. So we are in a very bad position here. I personally have been mentioned by the president himself in his social networks, and I got death threats. Oh yeah, very, very, very. It was a very big honor for me. It was 3-4 days of intense death threats, and I'm going to find you, I'm going to find your family, and I'm going to kill your daughter. But before I kill your daughter, I'm going to rape her, because that's the kind of people we're talking about. And his sons also mentioned me a number of times in social networks. And the problem is not only money, it's a moral problem. Unfortunately, we have 30% of people in Brazil who still support Bolsonaro. I don't know how I can live in the same country with these people. I really don't. I don't see a way out. I don't see how I can look at the faces of people who voted for this guy, who still support him. But that's it. So what Bolsonaro did, it was a continuation of what Temer did before him. Temer was the vice president of Dilma Rousseff. Dilma Rousseff was a leftist president, the first female president in Brazil, a leftist, and she suffered a coup. They don't like saying that. They say she was impeached. But when you were impeached for something that was not an impeachable offense, that's a coup. So she was ousted. And her vice president, because in Brazil, and I'm not going to explain this here because it would take a long time, but the way Brazilian democracy functions, we had a leftist president and the vice president that was center right, and later revealed himself to be not as centrist as we imagined. And he started dismantling culture in Brazil. And after Bolsonaro came to power, the first thing, one of the first things he did was we had a culture ministry. It was, he ended it, so we don't have a ministry of culture anymore. And most of the public incentives to produce, he stopped it. There were some I don't know how to what's the English word for editais, public
funding calls. Funding calls. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Funding calls. So it's called CALL. Chamada
Oh,
de financiamento.
Okay.
Funding
oh,
calls.
okay. Yeah. So we had a lot of productions that had already been approved, and they went through the motions. They presented documents. They were just waiting for the money, and Bolsonaro stopped it because, oh no, this is a leftist project. Oh, this is about Black people. This is about LGBTQ people. And he stopped the financing, which had already been approved. So that's where we're living now. Now, the problem right now is not just distributing movies. That's a problem we always had in Brazil. I've seen movies in Brazilian films in festivals that I've seen, I loved it, and I couldn't wait for the people to see it. And then 2, 3, 4 years go by and the movie never came out because it didn't have the money to be distributed. So that's a very old problem in Brazil. But now my fear is it's not right now, it's 2 years from now, because right now there's a shutdown in film industry in Brazil. And film in Brazil, they usually tend to take 2-3 years from the stage of pre-production, financing, production, post-production, and being released. It takes about 3-4 years. And so we are going to see the results of this of 2019, 20, and 21, and 22, if we don't get rid of Bolsonaro soon. We are going to see the lack of films in 4 years, because there's no way of producing as much right now.
Okay, thanks. And there are a couple of questions in the Q&A, but I think you've actually answered them. Although one of them, I think it's Vinicius, does say, no, it's Felipe says, you should keep making videos for YouTube. I bet a lot of people like me still want to watch your content on the platform. So there's a little tip from your public to encourage you to keep posting those videos. I wanted just to ask a question that sort of ties back in with some of the things that we've been talking about generally today. So this is a conference about film criticism in Spain, Portugal, and Latin America. And I explained in my introduction at the beginning, that we're not trying to force some kind of a link between countries where there isn't actually any kind of a link to start with. There isn't a homogenous film criticism that comes out of Portugal that's the same as in Spain, that's the same in Brazil, et cetera, et cetera. But we were curious to know, are there any kind of, what are the contact points between these different countries, if any exist? So you, Pablo, for example, when you read other critics, who do you read? Do you tend to turn, obviously you've got great English, so do you tend to turn automatically to Anglo publications and Anglo sites, or are you curious to know what Argentine critics are saying about Latin American film or even Brazilian film? And with the boom, the sudden discovery that Brazil has made of Portuguese cinema over the last 10 years, I mean, are there any kind of interactions between you and film critics in Portugal, or any likelihood of any kind of interactions?
Well, I have some very good friends that are Portuguese film critics, friends that I made in festivals, which is that's how film critics interact with people. We go to film festivals. That's our main source of, being sociable. So I have a very good film critics, Portuguese film critics that are friends. But what I read, I have this old, and I know I've changed my mind about this. But when I started teaching film criticism, I used to say that I don't like, and I still don't, but I don't think it's wrong anymore. I used to think it was wrong. I didn't like to read other people's film critics before I wrote my own. And I thought it was wrong to read other people's material before you write your own, because I thought, oh, you're going to be influenced, and I think you should be pure. And I don't think that anymore, because I have very good friends who are great film critics, and they told me they like to read other people's critics before they write their own, because they think that film criticism is a dialogue. So I'm going to write answering points that you raise in your article, and then someone else will answer those, and so on. I still don't read film criticism before I write my own, because I used to say I always say that old dogs don't learn new tricks, so I don't feel comfortable. But after I read in my pieces, I always read what my colleagues had to say about that film, because I think that I learn from them, because they usually will have a vision, they will have observed something, they will have some kind of insight that would never occur to me. And I think that makes me a better writer. So I read a lot of Brazilian film critics. I do, like Merten and Zanin, Luis Carlos Zanin, Luis Carlos, Luis Carlos, Luis, they're both Luis. So Luis Merten, Luis Zanin.
Zanin Oricho.
Oricho, yeah, but they're both Luis. I think only Merten is Luis Carlos. I read, there's a film critic from my city who I like very much, who is Marcelo Miranda. Marcelo Miranda, who used to write to Filmes Povo, which I talked before. There was a kind of rivalry. I always read him nowadays, Marcelo Miranda. And who else I like to read? Paulo Henrique Silva and Neuza Barbosa, Maria do Rosário, although Maria do Rosário, I read more of her emails than she writes fantastic emails about all sorts of things. But I also read some US film critics. I used to read Roger Ebert all the time. I was really fond of Ebert. He became a friend eventually. And I know it's now I said before about viralatismo, and I'm going to say that my favorite film critic is an American. So, but I don't think that's being a vira-lata. I think it's because he is really the best. Roger Ebert, I love the guy. Nowadays, I read Matt Zoller, Sites, A.O. Scott, Manolo Dargis, Stephanie Zacharek, Dana Stevens, who's a friend. And I think that those are the people. Oh, I also love reading Armand White. And I want to clarify something here. I hate Armand White. I think Armand White, I always read his things, and I never understand what the guy's crazy. I mean, but he's also a very good writer, and he knows a lot about movies. And I think that's a very important thing that I always tell my readers. Sometimes some reader will come to me and he'll say, you are my favorite film critic, because it's amazing. We are almost always in agreement. And that's not a compliment, because you're not complimenting me. You're saying that you like me the best because I'm always saying that you're right. I don't like that. I don't think that's the role of a film critic. I think the role of a film critic is to challenge your view, to make you think beyond the movie you saw. And so I like to read people that I disagree with a lot, but people that I respect. There's no point in reading someone I don't respect. And Armand White is one of those guys. I never agree with him. I never agree with him, but he knows a lot. He's very intelligent and he writes beautifully. So but he's crazy, like I said. So it's very interesting to read what a crazy person has to say when she is, or he is very, very clever.
Okay.
So those are the ones I wrote.
Right, great, thank you. Yeah, we've only got exactly 3 minutes left. I can't believe that is the fastest hour ever that's just flown by. Really has. There is a question here that I think would be a really nice one to finish on, which is from Sarah. Thanks, from Sarah Barrow. I hope I'm right. And it says, so this is a question bearing in mind that we're all academics. This is what we do, and certainly for a lot of us, not all of us, obviously, but quite a few of us are working in the United Kingdom in cultural studies, in a cultural studies kind of a context where we're encouraging students to learn about Brazil. And my job is to teach students about Brazil, and one of the things that I do is use cinema to be able to help them understand Brazil, et cetera, et cetera. So we push. My job is to push Brazilian cinema. I'm curious to know what film critics in Brazil have to say, but it's very unlikely that I'm going to read a film critic's criticism of an American film. If you know what I mean, I'm more likely to seek out, well, that's by the by, I guess. But the question basically is, is there a way that film critics and academics, or I guess I'm thinking about the kind of academics that we are over here in the UK, rather than Marcelo Ikeda, who's here, who you perhaps know, Marcelo, who's an established film critic himself, and who teaches film in Brazil. Which is very different. You have to wake up now, Marcelo, which is very different from what I do, in terms of, who I teach and what I teach and all the rest of it. But the question really is, are there ways that we could be less suspicious of each other? Are we suspicious of each other? What are the barriers? And if there are barriers, how could we overcome those so that there's more contact between those who do an academic kind of criticism and those who are film critics who are sort of writing about films in a different way, I guess. Sarah, if I've misrepresented that question, please jump in and help me out.
Beautiful. No, I have sometimes found, as somebody going in as a researcher into the Peruvian context, that critics have sort of wondered why are you studying our film? And there's just been a little bit of a bit of a difference between the sort of work, I guess, that we do that takes more time and blah, 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 and critics. But I was really struck by what Pablo was saying there about being an advocate for Brazilian cinema. I thought that was wonderful, actually. So that I haven't heard that so much before. So that's sort of separate to the question, but I just wanted to thank you for that, because I think that's brilliant as a critic to be an advocate for Brazilian cinema.
Well, thank you. I don't know quite how to answer that, because I am not suspicious at all of academics, but I think that's because, like I said, I teach three different courses. I have a course that is film theory, film language, and film criticism. I have a second one that is based on David Bordwell's and Christine Thompson's writings. And I have this one about The Godfather. And now I'm doing, I'm finishing, and I'm going probably to start teaching it a course about cinema and politics, the intersection between cinema and politics. And not only, I'm not going to talk exclusively about propaganda films. My interest is showing people how every film is political, because I'm tired of every time I write about a movie, someone comes and say, "Oh, why do you have to put politics in everything?" And I'm not. Art is political. It's in the movie. So I'm giving the final touch and scores. And to do these courses, I have to study a lot. I have to read a lot of articles by academics, research, and so it's part of my job, reading, consuming, research and reading what academics are writing. So I don't see that suspicion I'm sure it exists, but not for me. I thank you because that's where I get my ideas to the courses.
That's brilliant. That's really great to know. And I think that's a really good place to stop and to wrap things up on a positive, where it's possible. There's some interesting comments down the chat, some ideas of other places where we find inspiration that we can all look at in our own time.